So now let's go over actually exporting our document. We went over this a little bit near the beginning of the course, and that was just so you knew how to save and how to export something basic that you could share. But let's now go over how to actually export your document in a way that would fit whatever you want to do. So let's go up to File and then Export. And you'll see that this sort of dialog box comes up where do you want to save it, and you have a bunch of options right here. What we went over was the Adobe PDF Interactive, and what that does is it creates a PDF like you've seen in the past, just a normal PDF where every page it just looks like this down the row. If you save it for print, what that's going to do is it's going to save it in a way that works best with a printer. It's going to basically not really include any of the hyperlinks, because if it's going to print, then you don't need to include hyperlinks because you can't click on a piece of paper. Down here we have a couple of e-publishing formats, and what e-publishing formats are they're just formats that like your Amazon Kindle or your digital book reader would be able to use. Then beneath this we have the Flash players, which are pretty outdated at this point. A lot of people don't support Flash. I don't even think Adobe really supports Flash anymore, but they are there. Beneath this you have HTML, which is actually kind of interesting. So I actually created one of these a little bit earlier, and if we open this up, you'll see that it kind of saves it, but HTML requires a lot of CSS, padding, alignments, stuff like that. So this is just saving the basics of the styling, and you'd actually have to go in there and sort of program in the different padding to make it re-look like the original document. However, if you want to create an asset within InDesign and then save it in an HTML document, you can then use that asset. So it's interesting, but it isn't the most useful right off the bat. Beneath that, what we have is we have a couple of picture images, so you could save it as a JPEG, which is going to save it as just a large image that's going to kind of have all the pages. So we can just click on that and I'll show you what happens. If we click save, it's going to ask how many pages do we want to save, what's the quality, what's the resolution, the color space, do we want to save it in RGB, or do we want to try to change it over to CMYK? We're going to go with that. We're going to click export. And it's going to go ahead and export through. And then all we have to do is then open up the document, which is right here in our files, right over here. And you'll see that the JPEG comes up. And if I open it up, it just saves it as a JPEG, just like so. This is just the one sort of page. If I created multiple pages, it would just create like basically a really long sort of JPEG. The next thing that we can do is we can go to File, back to Export. And then the last option here on the bottom is going to be XML. XML is interesting. It's a little actually complex. It's sort of like the file hierarchy within InDesign. So it has all the metadata, including things like, where the pictures in here were taken, different things like the properties of certain elements. And so sometimes it's required to export this and import this, but it's not common, not very common, at least in what I've personally done in InDesign, so you don't really need to understand this one too much. Just it's here if you need to use it. If you look up a tutorial or something and it says to do it, it's right here, but we don't need to really go into that. InDesign markup language right here. This one will save it in the InDesign markup language, and this is good to save for the past. So if you're planning on opening this up in CS6, CS5, or CS4, save it in this one, because all three of those will actually support this document, meaning that you can save now and then import it later into an earlier version. So if I try to just save this file right now as a .indd, which is what the InDesign file is by default, if I tried to import that into CS6, CS5, or CS4, it's going to give me an error saying that the file's broken or something like that. So if you need to open it up in a previous version, save it in InDesign markup. Other than that, that is basically all of the export options. Understand that every single one of these options, whenever you export them, are going to have more options within it. So when I click this save button, it's going to bring up a dialog box, and we have certain aspects in here. For example, you can choose which pages are going to export. If you go over here into compression, it's going to, a PDF is really just sort of a stringed together version of the documents, a lot of times using pictures, and in here you'll see that what we're doing to compress the images that are inside the file. So if we bring in an image, we're actually going to compress them down for this PDF, and we can choose if we want to keep the high quality. Of course, it's going to make a bigger file, or we can lower down the quality. You can see that there isn't a lot of different options. It's going to save it in a JPEG, whether it be lossy, which is a conversion like a compression, or lossless, which means it's not going to be compressed, but it's going to be really, really large. We can also lock our document, which is kind of neat. If we're saving this, saving a PDF, or let's say it has medical info or something like that on it, we can actually lock the document. So you can hit require a password to open this document, and we could type in something like InDesign. Let me make sure I spelled that right. InDesign, and then you'll see require a password to open the document. So now if I click export with these settings, it's going to say, it tries to automatically open it, and now you'll see that there's this password, so we can type in InDesign, and it'll say this, and now once it exports, now you'll see that once we get to this part, it's going to say anytime we try to open up this analytic report.pdf, we have to type in InDesign. And this is a neat way to lock the report. Like I said, if it has sensitive information, whether it be a business or medical, you can lock it from this place as well. But that is basically it on the export settings. They aren't too complex, but there are a couple little caveats, especially with the color space, like in the previous lecture. Just understanding that your colors may come out slightly different. There's a lot of different versions that you can save it to, so depending on where you want to go, you want to make sure you choose the version right for you. PDF is usually a really good, a solid option. Most publishing companies, if you're sending them to them, sending a PDF to, or the document to them, PDF is the version that they want. Sometimes they might want an EPUB or even like, an InDesign markup language document. So they'll probably tell you about that. Just understand they're all in the export settings there. You can choose whichever one you want, go through the dialog boxes to switch around some of the settings to fit how you want to export it. And there you have it. You can get your document into the real world.